What's the good word, everybody? We have a verdict in the Diddy trial. Let me put my hat on. When you're facially challenged like the sports doctor Spock is, you have to use accessories to make yourself look a little bit better. I am live and I am here on Sports Doc Spock Radio. We're ready to talk a little bit about the Diddy verdict. Find you guys a little something to listen to. Excuse me, because I know y'all just don't want to hear my voice in my face. So I will try to add a little bit extra to it by playing some of the stuff that I witnessed on MSNBC, and I actually see that I am live here. Let me see if I can add a link somehow. Probably have to probably need to had already done it. Yeah, I probably need to. Well, that says share. Oh, I can share that on Facebook. I guess I can't because it's not logged in right here. I ain't gonna worry about it then. Um, actually, ain't none of that really. I can copy the link though. Copy that link, and maybe I should have did that on my phone. But whatever. We'll get into it in just a second. I just want to find the video I was listening to. Find the video I was listening to, and we'll get into it just uh just a little bit. I probably should have had this ready before I started the live. Wouldn't that have been smart? Wouldn't that have let you know how intelligent I was if I'd have did this shit before I even went live? Well, the hell with y'all too. Yeah, was Combs play the verdict. Now, Sean Combs, Diddy Combs, was found not guilty on sex trafficking and conspiracy and racketeering, and was found guilty on two counts, one for Cassie and one for, I guess, a girl named Jane, for transportation and for transporting prostitution. Good Lord, why can't I see that? But the two major things he was convicted on, he will be found not guilty on. And he could be out of jail today. The judge might give him a bail today, but he could do up to 20 years. Those two things he was convicted on can be served consecutively instead of concurrently. Like consecutive means he does one and then he does the other. Concurrent means he do them both at the same time. So he could still see a lot of time, but a lot of people don't think so. A lot of people think he'll be home because he could just get probation too, um, because of the fact that he has really good lawyers and he doesn't really have a violent criminal record. He doesn't. Now we all know the boy is wild, but as far as the court of law, he doesn't have violent convictions. So we'll take a listen to. It's starting at about this point. I believe. We'll take a listen.
Happy. He's excited to come back to court to formulate the best argument for sentencing. And yes, he might spend some years in prison, but the amount of time that he would spend is far less than if he fled and never came back. And he has children here. He has enterprises here. He has at least 60 civil lawsuits that he has to fight. He has, in my mind, and maybe I'm making too strong of an application as a defense attorney, he has far more reasons to stay here and fight now after this verdict than to flee and never come back. And so do I think he's going to get released? Probably not. That's a high bar to overcome, and I don't think the judge will allow that. But I think there is a very valid and strong argument that he is not a flight risk, and I think there's a possibility, albeit very small, that he walks out of those golden doors.
And Aaron, from what I understand, the judge has now said he is going to take his time to consider if indeed Sean Combs will be released today or not.
He will give a decision today, Kira, but the government and defense attorneys are asking for a period of hours so they can write letters, make their arguments on both sides. So it could be quite a while before the judge decides whether Sean Combs deserves to be released on bail. The government is making the case that he still faces up to 20 years in prison after his conviction on the 2 transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges. But the jury has cleared him of the most serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy that could have sent him to prison for life.
Brian, how do you think, what was it that defense lawyers did? What was it that they said? What was it that they had that you think helped deliver a victory for their client?
Only a partial victory, though, because he still could do 20 years. And then the RICO case said that he was the head of a whole criminal organization. That might have been a reach. That's probably all they said. That he's not running a criminal organization, so you can't really RICO him. Bad Boy Records is not a game. So, that was just hard to prove. That was probably a losing effort anyway. I think that was just a bonus charge anyway. I think they pretty much knew that they weren't going to convict him on a RICO charge because it don't make sense.
I think the case against Sean Combs was the first time, at least in me covering the Harvey Weinstein trial, where I was sitting in court.
Had some Harvey Weinstein.
Where I was sitting in court. And many of the cases that I think we would associate with the Me Too movement, where the defense was willing to say, my client is indefensible in some of his actions. That what he did and what you saw is wrong, but making the very strong distinction and walking the very tightrope of saying what he did wrong and what he's being accused of are 2 different things. What we've seen of people in the past of saying, well, they're all lying. You can't trust these women. You can't believe them. I think that's not a way to handle these cases. And I think what the defense did well is in talking to the human aspect of these are very messy relationships, that Sean Combs is an abuser. And Mark Kniffelno said it himself. If Sean Combs was accused of domestic violence, there would not be a trial because he would plead guilty. Do I think that's a bit of showmanship? Yes. Do I think that would actually be true? Maybe not. But I think arguing it nonetheless in front of a jury and admitting to some of the bad facts and trying to parse through it all, I think it gave them credibility to get to this verdict.
Let's bring in our Bernardo Villalona, who's been also with us as an attorney.
It's a nice looking attorney right there. Showmanship, saying that he would plead guilty if he was on trial for domestic violence. I don't know if it's showmanship. You were caught red-handed. We all saw you drag the poor woman down the hallway, and it's not funny. And, pretty much physically have your way with her. As far as, I believe you kicked her in the fucking head. Jesus Christ. I mean, the shit that went on in that hotel room was pretty rough. So if he was on trial for that, you would have no choice but to plead guilty. So I don't know if that's showmanship, or if it was if it's even a strategy, you were caught red-handed. So why even fight that?
Contributor here at ABC News. You and I have been talking every day for months now about this case, Bernarda. I asked Brian this question as an attorney who has been involved with domestic violence cases. I want to ask you as well your thoughts on what this means for the victims.
For the victims, I think this is a slap in the face for the victims. I think this is going to deter victims from coming forward and telling their story and being the voice for the voiceless, in the sense of representing other victims that are not willing to come forward. I know that for a fact, I'm sure that the prosecution right now is very upset with this verdict, because they definitely put a lot of time into this prosecution, into this investigation. And they also did a lot of comforting of trying to give strength to these women, to Jane and to Cassie, to come forward, to show their face, to share their story. And this is not just like any other regular domestic violence case or just any type of abuse case. You're dealing that they were stepping forward to speak against a music mogul, a person who had the key to New York City, one of the most powerful people in the industry. So just think of how scared they were to come forward and to tell their story, and scared of what could happen once they came forward. Because I'm sure with social media and people talking in the news that they have received a lot of threats and people commenting about who they are and what they've done, and that they are liars. But they alone know what happened to them. And they had prosecutors that believed in them and believed their story and became their voice.
Aaron, I understand court has now been adjourned. Combs was escorted out. A massive applause was heard from within the courtroom.
The judge said court is adjourned for now, Kira. He's going to give the parties until 1 p.m. Eastern time to submit letters.
That's about 20 minutes from now.
Against his release on bail. The judge left the bench until later on this afternoon, when he'll give his decision. Once the judge was off the bench, Sean Combs was escorted out by the marshals. The judge told him he's going to have to cool his heels in the courthouse for a bit. But as he left the courtroom, there were applause from the gallery, some cheers in the gallery, where members of his family have been in steadfast vigil. His mother here most days, his twin daughters back, his sons have been here most days. They cheered for their father after he was acquitted of the most serious charges that he...
Yeah, because I guess they believe that he could come home if he would have got that racketeering charge or that sex trafficking charge, it would have been over. That would have been it. But the two, transporting charges, he could be home soon. Maybe he might do a few years. I actually think he might get probation. But he might do a few years, but he might come home. Like, he might be home today. They say the judge is giving him to 1 o'clock to figure out whether he have bail or not. That's about 1 o'clock Eastern time. It's 12:43 right now. So, he could be home in the next hour. He can be back in Manhattan chilling. Now the conviction he got, like I said before, 10 years apiece if he does that time, but it's no mandatory minimum. He could get time served for both of them because he's been in jail about a year. So, and he will have, he'll have time served on top of his sentence. How long has Diddy even been in jail? Has he been in jail a year? I don't think he's been in jail a year. It seemed like he got locked up when it was cold. So 6 or 7 months, but that RICO thing could have had him put away ever. And like Bernie Mac says, it's a long time when they take the 4 off that motherfucker.
he faces, still convicted of transportation for the purposes of prostitution, and now we await the decision as to whether he's going to be released on bail. If he is, he will walk out to a crowd that includes people holding up Sean John t-shirts and other supporters who have been here saying, "Where's the Rico?" They've been shouting that into the street for weeks, and they would certainly welcome this verdict if he is to walk out those golden doors, Kira. For the jury, they really had to make a difficult decision, not just on the racketeering conspiracy, but as the defense said,
for the golden doors, they talked about the doors in the front of the courthouse where you can see people walk out are actually gold. So that's why they keep referring to those golden doors.
The women that Combs was accused of trafficking were also his long-term girlfriends. Cassie Ventura with him for 11 years. Jane with him for more than 3 years. And the defense tried to argue that they were consensual relationships, that they were in it just as much as he was because that was their lifestyle, even though they freely admitted the polyamorous swingers kink was not everybody's cup of tea. But he said these women were in it, and it required the jury to make distinctions between consent and coercion and love and control and free will, and in the end they acquit on the most serious charges that carried a minimum sentence of 15 years, acquitting on sex trafficking in addition to the racketeering conspiracy, Kira.
Bernard, I want to bring you back in on that. As Aaron was saying, this really came down to violence and fear versus love, infidelity, and jealousy. We are watching the doors now to see if lawyers will be coming out and coming to the mics. But Bernarda, Sean Combs may be acquitted of the most serious charges here. But let's talk about the impact all of this will have on ongoing civil cases.
Yes, so you have to think, so even though he was acquitted of the most...
Right. He has around 60 civil cases he has to go through. That's a lot. And they say at least 14 of them happen to involve minors. So let's take a listen to what she has to say about how this verdict can affect the civil case.
Serious charge in this criminal case. When we're talking about a civil case, it's a different burden. The criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. When you're dealing with civil cases, it's by preponderance of the evidence, 51% versus 49%. But then again...
Right. Because if you remember, O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murdering Nicole Brown Simpson and the young Goldman. I don't what's his. I forget. Oh, why did I forget his name? I remember Ronald Goldman, but I don't think that was his name. Anyway. But civically, you know, in the civil case, he lost it. The wrongful death suit, he lost it, and ended up owing those families a whole lot of money that he never paid. Anyway.
With a civil case, he's just at risk of losing his empire in terms of money, but his liberty is no longer at stake. So he can live to fight those cases outside of jail bars.
You bring up a good point, because if he would have been found guilty of racketeering, that could have forced him to forfeit all his businesses, right?
Absolutely. So if he would have been found guilty of racketeering conspiracy and of the sex trafficking, anything that was used in order to facilitate this crime. So, for example, his mansions in Florida and his mansion in Los Angeles would have been at risk that it would have been taken away from the government, since there was evidence that was put forth having to deal with that some of the sex trafficking took place inside of those homes.
With the baby
he would
oil.
have been at risk of losing that, and also a lot of his businesses and his money.
In his closing argument, one of Combs' defense attorneys asked jurors to summon the courage to acquit Combs, who conceded he could be violent, jealous, and a drug user, but whose lawyers argued the case is badly exaggerated to make Combs like something he is not. Do you think that's what happened, Brian Buckmeyer?
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what happened. That's exactly how the defense served it up to the jury. Like, yes, he could be a little bit violent. Yes, he could be a little freaky, but he's not a criminal. Um, that's what they would have had to present in order for him to get off completely.
This one I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, and I apologize. I'm trying to get information from different people as I go about this, trying to get information from people inside the court. I think, let me try to put it into words. I think when it comes to this case, this might have been more about how the case was handled than the actual people who testified. I could see how this might be an indictment on the women who testified, and I would say, as someone who watched them, I don't think it should be. I think, if anything, this is about how the case was handled by the government in terms of how they argued it, how they presented it, and the people that were selected. People being selected being the jurors, not the team themselves. And so I think as we move forward with this case and we see what's going to happen, because there is a possibility, although small, that Sean Combs walks out today, I think we just take stock of what we heard, what was argued, and what the result was, and not lay this at the feet of anyone who testified.
I don't know if it's that all that small of a possibility that he walks away today, because the most serious charges he's been acquitted of. He could go home on bail today.
And now I understand, Aaron, a statement has been given on behalf of Cassie Ventura, star witness in this case. What are you learning?
Her attorney, Doug Wigdor, just sent us the following statement. This entire criminal process started when our client, Cassie Ventura, had the courage to file her civil complaint in November 2023. And Kira, we should say that's true. The criminal investigation is largely based on the statements in Cassie Ventura's lawsuit, and intensified, of course, once video from the 2016 hotel security camera became public. The statement from Doug Wigdor, her attorney, goes on to say, although the jury did not find Combs guilty of sex trafficking Cassie beyond a reasonable doubt, she paved the way for a jury to find him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. By coming forward with her experience, Cassie's attorney, Doug Wigdor, goes on to say, Cassie has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. We must repeat with no reservation that we believe and support our client, who showed exemplary courage throughout this trial. She testified for 4 days, often quite emotionally so, giving graphic, explicit detail of what she said she was made to do. And Sean Combs did not deny the facts of the freak-offs. Everything that happened in those hotel rooms did not get challenged by the defense. The defense simply saw it differently, as something that went on in a personal, consensual relationship, not sex trafficking. And that's how the outcome is reflected now, Kira.
Bernard, I want to go on to read another part of that statement on behalf of Cassie Ventura's attorney, saying she displayed unquestionable strength and brought attention to the realities of powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that has persisted for decades without repercussion. This case proved that change is long overdue, and we will continue to fight on behalf of survivors. Two things that...
Okay, so she doesn't seem all that disappointed about him not being found guilty. According to that statement, of him not being found guilty of the racketeering and the sex trafficking, I think she seems to be satisfied with the verdict, because she feels like her team feels like she was the one that had the courage to bring all this to light. And they did get a conviction where he could serve some pretty serious jail time now. He won't be in jail forever, but he can be locked up for a while. He could do a few years off of this.
That stood out to me. Powerful men in our orbit and the misconduct that persists and change that is long overdue. Your thoughts?
Power and money. You can buy yourself out of a conviction. Let's be honest that if Sean Combs wasn't able to to get the team that he got and pay for that defense team and experts and investigators to help defend himself, that we would have had a different outcome today. But money
Possibly.
and power, that you can still get away with crimes if you have money and power. But I have to say, I was in a courtroom for Cassie's testimony, and she was a strong, strong witness. You can tell that the courage that she had, the strength that she exhibited. I mean, when she spoke and when she would cry from time to time, when she revisited those freak-offs and when she revisited those times when Sean Combs brutally beat her, and to see her in court sitting down, showing the strength and courage that she was able to overcome this. I think one of the most strongest moments that brought people to tears is when she said at some point that she went home and she told her husband, "You can do this without me," and that she wanted to cross the street and commit suicide because of what she had been through. But I'm glad that Cassie has been able to pick herself up and has been able to move on, taking it day by day, because it does show the strength that she got as a result of coming forward. That coming forward helped to bring closure to her.
Bernarda, thank you. Aaron, getting more insight from Sean Combs inside that.
Yeah, so I think she's satisfied. Like she just said, she got to speak her piece in court. They said she was a very strong witness, very emotional. She was very strong, and you know she got she did. They didn't get the main conviction, but they got a couple convictions. Excuse me.
Courtroom saying this coming from journalists in the press room. He was overcome with emotion as the verdict was read. His feet were visibly shaking throughout the reading of the verdict.
He has been an emotional defendant throughout the entire case. In fact, at one point, the judge had to admonish his attorney that Combs was gesturing and trying to make eyes with jurors as if to attempt to influence them when they were hearing certain testimony. And the judge made him sit straight and silent throughout much of the testimony. But as the verdict was being read, he started gesturing. He got down on the floor after it was over to kneel in prayer. Applause broke out into the courtroom. And I'm struck, Kira, the crowd has gathered here outside, and in the windows of the upper floors, courthouse employees are peering down to look at the streetscape below as more people rush toward these doors in anticipation of a possible release on bail sometime later on today, Kira.
And as we wait to hear what the outcome of that is, of course, if indeed the judge decides he could be released today, Brian Buckmeyer, let's talk about the jury makeup here and how it influenced this case. You think we talked about the fact that it was 8 men, 4 women. Your thoughts on the number of men in this case versus women, and how you see that influencing what happened here?
Yes, I know oftentimes when we look at jurors, we look at race or gender. And yes, there's a possibility that the number of men in this case could have been beneficial to Sean Combs in terms of trying to decide what this relationship was like. But I think probably more importantly than race or gender would be age. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to the conversation as to whether or not these were consensual relationships, which appears to be at the heart of the jury's verdict in terms of saying, yes, we saw that you brought these people across state lines for prostitution, but we don't believe there was force, fraud, or coercion for trafficking, and we don't believe that there was a criminal enterprise or that there was not 2 predicate acts. Right? I think a large part of the not believing comes down to consent. And what I find, at least when I talk to a jury or just talk to people in general, is there's a big divide in terms of what is consent when you talk to someone who is over the age of 40 or 45 and under the age of 40 or 45.
Okay.
And when you have a jury where more than half of them are 51 years to 74 years old, and even if you go even below that, there's a number of people who are in their 40s, I think the conversation and the argument that Mark Agnifilo and his team were having about what it means to consent works for people in that age demographic. I think if we had a jury that was predominantly in their 20s or early 30s, this argument of consent would be very different. So while I do see that there is value.
See where he's right there is that people now, younger people are a little bit more sensitive. It's just everything. The people that are a little bit older are. So I really get what he said there. It seemed to be an older juror when he said most of them were pretty much in their 40s. They pretty much ranging in age is 51 to 70. He said, and then when you go into the 40s, it was a few more of those. So this was an older group, which he believes was to Diddy's advantage when it comes to the consent thing. Because older people, I tell you, like my generation and older are a lot less sensitive to a lot of the things just goes on in the world than people just a little bit younger than us. I guess I'm DX, the generation, generation X. I'm Generation X, a Gen Zer, and you know, might be way more sensitive than I am.
When looking at the gender or the sex of the jurors, I think the age told us a lot more based on the arguments we saw.
Bernardo,
could probably agree
you
with
think it was
that.
smart that Sean Combs did not take the stand?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If Sean Combs would have taken the stand, this case would have become a deliberation of whether this jury believed what Sean Combs had to say, whether his demeanor came off as one as credible. Also, you have to think where if Sean Combs were to testify, there was a lot of evidence that the prosecution was not able to get in their case in chief because they were missing a link. And that link would have been Sean Combs. So they would have been able to get that evidence in had Sean Combs testified. So it would have changed the deliberation process, and we would have probably been looking at a completely different verdict. Also got to think, how would he be able to explain in terms of the brutal beating of Cassie and of Jane on that particular occasion?
When did Jane get beat up in camera? Okay, I don't know. Did she ever accuse Diddy of domestic violence? But although, when you look at the way he beat up Cassie, he's done that shit more than once. You gotta crawl before you can walk, even when you learning how to deliver an ass whooping. But anyway, to get to it, we'll get into the gist of it. Diddy was found guilty of 2 counts, one with Jane, one of Cassie, of transporting with the intent of prostitution, and found not guilty of sex trafficking and the conspiracy RICO charge he was found not guilty of. This is your boy, the Sports Dr. Spock. I'm gonna have to end this live because I got something to do. Thank you for the one person that's in here still watching me. And I'll be going live on this channel a little bit more often because I want to get a little bit better at the live streaming or whatever. It's your boy, the Sports Dr. Spock. Diddy might be home in a couple hours on bail. I'll check y'all out later.